The Right Side with Doug Billings.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the special edition of The Right Side. Doug Billings here with you, talking about the summit that we just saw over in China. Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping in Beijing for some high-stakes summit talks. And the meetings covered trade, technology, the Middle East, critical issues of Taiwan. But there's one line from President Xi Jinping that has set certain corners of the conservative media on edge. Some podcasters, including Megyn Kelly in her widely watched segment, are calling Xi's comments provocative. And they're sounding the alarm, Megyn and many other people, that China is openly warning America that it's got to step aside or risk catastrophic conflict. So, ladies and gentlemen, I am here today to put your minds completely at ease about this. This is what happens when people respond to a headline or a story and they don't look behind the headline and they don't read between the lines of the story itself. Now, Megyn Kelly and other people, their job is to put forth extraordinary stuff, extraordinary content. I'm not saying true stuff or content. I'm just saying extraordinary stuff that grabs your attention because that drives the algorithm for their social media networks. So I don't blame them for doing that. I blame them sometimes for not being honest, but they're out to drive clicks. They're out to get people's attention. And so by telling you that Xi Jinping is somehow saying there's a catastrophic conflict on the horizon because he's talking about a story in Greek mythology is ridiculous. So let me explain and put your minds at ease. Xi Jinping invoked the so-called Thucydides Trap. This far from proving that China is unstoppable and ascending to power, ready to displace the United States. His words actually reveal the exact opposite. Now, Thucydides and the trap that he's talking about, people just went crazy today on the internet. Beijing knows that it's negotiating from a position of relative weakness, and America's renewed strength under strong leadership has forced President Xi Jinping to choose careful language instead of issuing ultimatums. So let's start with the Thucydides trap and what it actually is, because context matters, all right? The phrase comes from the ancient Greek historian Thucydides, who chronicled some of the devastating Peloponnesian War between, rising democratic powers of Athens and the established military power of Sparta. Thucydides wrote that the war became inevitable. Not because either side necessarily wanted it, but because Athens and their growing strength created genuine fear in Sparta, and Sparta's refusal to yield created an irresistible challenge for Athens. Okay? So the result was a 27-year run of war that ruined and destroyed the Greek world. So my friend General Michael Flynn picked up on this the other day. I think he nailed the diplomatic signaling in his analysis. He called Xi's reference to the Thucydides Trap as a classical piece of Chinese diplomatic signaling. These are General Flynn's words. Polite on the surface, but very sharp and pointed underneath. Okay. General Flynn is correct that Xi is framing China as the dynamic ascending power. And he's framing the United States as the tired established power that should begin to step aside gracefully. Okay. So on the surface, it sounds like a veiled threat. Accommodate Beijing on trade, on technology, especially accommodate us on Taiwan, or you're going to risk sliding into what Xi Jinping called extremely dangerous place. Okay. A great power war. But here's the behind the scenes truth. When you look behind the headline and in between the words of the story, you don't hear this from the other alarmists out there. You hear it right here because I deal in truth and context. This isn't the language from President Xi of a confident, unstoppable superpower dictating terms. This is the language of a formidable competitor, no doubt, who feels the pressure of America's renewed leadership and is trying to shape the narrative before the facts on the ground do it for him. That's what Xi Jinping is doing. All of you remember the pattern from the past decade and more, right? When America projected weakness under Obama and Biden, hesitating in the South China Sea, allowing massive intellectual property theft, tolerating currency manipulation, and signaling and agreeing to lopsided trade deals, well, of course, China advanced aggressively. Who wouldn't in those circumstances? Artificial islands that they built became military bases. American factories closed while Chinese factories boomed. Supply chains for us grew dangerously dependent on that strategic competitor, China. And it's exactly how rising powers exploit declining power and declining resolve. But this summit this week told a much different story. Xi Jinping spent the meeting stressing partnership, cooperation, and the desire to avoid confrontation. He repeatedly said that he doesn't want war, even while pressing hard on the Taiwan issue and questioning the United States defense commitments that are still looming in the near future about Taiwan. So that's not the posture of an ascending power that believes its moment has arrived. That's the posture of a nation that understands the scorecard and that knows the United States still dominates that scorecard, all right? So let's look at the hard facts that the fearmongers conveniently ignore. Economically, the United States remains in a league of its own. There's no one even remotely close to our economy. According to the latest International Monetary Fund data, America's nominal GDP stands at approximately $32.40 trillion this year. All right, 32 trillion. China is only at about 20. We'll give them 21 trillion. Still more than 55% smaller, the terms that actually matter for global influence, military sustainment, and technological leadership. They're much smaller than us. On a purchasing power parity basis, China may appear to be closer, but nominal figures in their economy reflect what nations can actually spend abroad on advanced components, overseas bases, or alliances without the distortion of internal price controls. China has structural headwinds that no amount of state propaganda can hide. Their total debt, public, private, and local government vehicles now exceeds 300% of their GDP. 300%. The property sector in China, once upon a time it was the engine of growth for that country, has never fully recovered over recent years. Their decades of, the one-child policy, they've produced a shrinking workforce. They've got one of the world's lowest birth rates, and they've got a population that's aging so quickly that the strain on their social services is going to be there for generations to come. Meanwhile, the United States enjoys things like energy dominance, unmatched innovation in artificial intelligence, semiconductors, biotechnology, and we've got a purely unique American, flexible, entrepreneurial economy that continues to attract the best talent from around the world, and it grows its own talent. We're the best farm team in the world for talent. And the talent stays here. Militarily, the gap is even more pronounced. Now, get a load of this. China's got the world's largest active duty force, more than 2 million people, all right? The largest Navy, if you're just counting ship hulls, okay? But the United States spends nearly 3 times as much on defense, and we operate 11 nuclear-powered aircraft carriers to China's 3. And only 2 of those is a working carrier. We maintain a submarine fleet whose stealth and capability remain unmatched by anybody in the world. And in the air, America has over 13,000 fifth-generation aircraft with thousands of fighters and decades of continuous combat experience. Folks, China has not fought a major war since 1979. And those glittering military parades that you see in Beijing, everybody's marching down the street, all of this equipment on parade. Well, it might look impressive on television, But there are credible analysts out there who have repeatedly noted that a lot of that displayed military might are just showpieces or mock-ups designed for, domestic propaganda, not made for battlefield effectiveness. Can anybody out there say paper mache? Because that's what you see marching down the street in China. Ladies and gentlemen, the honest truth is that China is a serious strategic competitor, and we've got to remain vigilant about all of that. We've got to protect our interests. We've got to secure our supply chains. We've got to modernize our military without apology. But the idea that Beijing is this 10-foot tall monster and ready to dictate the future of the Indo-Pacific is exactly the narrative that Xi Jinping wants you to accept. History shows that rising powers only succeed when the established power loses its nerve. Now, there was a time under Obama and Biden when we had lost our nerve. But America, under its current leadership, is refusing to do that. So that's why Xi Jinping chose partnership language over provocation. He understands that the catastrophic cost China would face in any kind of direct conflict, especially over Taiwan. Now, Taiwan is a thriving democracy, 23 million people, and it's a critical link in the global semiconductor supply chain, okay? Recent United States intelligence assessments and independent war games have shown that Beijing isn't currently planning any invasion of Taiwan, not in the near term, and it's precisely because the risks of failure in that endeavor are extraordinarily high for China. America's Navy and our air superiority, combined with allied support and Taiwan's own preparations, it makes a successful Chinese landing and occupation of that island extremely difficult, if not impossible. And keep in mind that the American military, the operation that's going on right now in Iran, that's only using up 10% of our total military capability. 10%. So look, folks, this brings us to the proud conservative heart of the entire matter. The Thucydides Trap is a warning from history. It's not an iron law of destiny. It only becomes reality when the established power believes the propaganda and begins to acquiesce. Well, we are not acquiescing in America. Thank you very much. America's renewed strength, our military modernization, energy independence, our supply chain security, our clear-eyed deal-making ability that brings the full weight of American enterprise to the table is exactly what's forcing Beijing to recalculate. President Trump made that clear when he got home, on his way home. The summit produced forward movement on trade rebalancing and technology framework that will protect American security and our jobs. No more one-sided deals, no more forced technology transfers. This is the art of the deal in action and on the world stage. And you all know, I don't sugarcoat realities. China is a long-term strategic rival with a vastly different system of government, and they've got ambitions that don't align with American values, absolutely. But we've got to stay vigilant. We should also reject the counsel of fear. The alarmism that you hear from some people out there plays right into Beijing's hands. It undermines American confidence at the very moment when confidence is our greatest strategic asset. There's real, tangible hope here, my friends. Hope that's rooted in proud American conservatism and the exceptional nature of our republic. When we lead with strength, when we invest in our military, when we rebuild our manufacturing strength, and we negotiate from undeniable advantage, when we manage great power competition without stumbling into unnecessary war and quagmire, history's littered with examples of rising challengers who looked unstoppable on paper only to be checked by a confident, resolute America. So the Thucydides Trap isn't closing in on us, folks, not even remotely. We are the ones writing the next chapter. And it's a chapter in which American leadership continues to deter aggression, to preserve peace, and keep the 21st century an American century. Not because we're looking for a fight, but because we stand firmly for freedom, for prosperity, for stability. It's the unique perspective that the right side right here delivers to you. Strong analysis, historical depth, and always, always the hopeful truth that proud conservatism backed up by American resolve wins the day. So I want to thank you for standing shoulder to shoulder with me, for spending these few minutes here with me. I'd ask you to please go to thoo-SID-uh-deez, prayerfully consider contributing to the program over there. It's how we keep it going, thoo-SID-uh-deez. Because after all, folks, as you know, we are in this together. Believe it. For the Republic. Cheers.
The Right Side with Doug Billings.